Good afternoon from Sacred Space at Titania's Realm. It's 1:58 p.m. on Monday, the 23rd of March 2026, and it's, let me try and eliminate that sun ray, there we go, and it's 1:58 p.m. So I had a very long sleep because toothy issues, and it's good that I had a good long sleep, and I'm all geared up to go to Hurston Dental Hospital tomorrow for the extraction of the bottom tooth. It's all feeling a bit kind of tender now, but anyway, my friend Robin is going to drive me there and pick me up, so thank you, Robin. That's really wonderful. I'm really grateful because last time coming home from that root canal surgery was a bit bizarre. I'm just going to move you over here. That sun beam from behind my head. Maybe I'll move over to this chair. That might be better. There we go. No, sunbeam's back. Well, you know, what do they say? Crowded house. Always take the weather with you. Right. So I'll have to do this in a diagonal, weird fashion, but it is what it is. Something just bit me. Oh, the joys of reading stories outside on YouTube. I'm just gonna. Otherwise I'll twist my back. So yeah, I slept late. I actually slept till 11:30 this morning, can you believe it? But I was spinning on my spinning wheel last night until about 12:30, and is that right? 11:30, 12:30, 11:30? My sleep machine said I slept 10.5 hours, so it must have been 1:30. Anyway, time slipped away on me, and it was interesting because I was watching a TV series on Stan called From, which is about a small town that attracts, you know, people driving past on the highway and traps them somehow in the town, like some kind of interdimensionality. And then there's these weird vampire creatures that do ask to be let in, but also get into the homes if you leave a window or door open. And so they're putting talismans in the windows and doors, which keeps these vampiric type creatures out. So it's all a bit horrific, but I'm like that. I'm a trauma survivor, and you know, when things get tough, I watch traumatic shows for some bizarre reason. It makes no sense to anyone. But anyway, it was interesting because, you know, it's more horror. You know, it's not. I'm not taking it literally, people of Earth, but there were some parallels that could be drawn with our current epoch, and so I'm sort of watching it with circumspection, spinning my wheel, thinking, fuck. You know, I often think about CERN and how they've smashed the particles together and they've interfered with the fabric of time and space. That's my belief system, that things are not being quite right. And one of the things that was definitely not quite right was when COVID came in 2020, which I had been kind of intuiting for quite some years prior, that there was something odd going down, but couldn't identify what that oddity might yet be. So and here we are, 2026, and you know, things are still very odd. It's very, very frightening and fraught for me to access medical facilities and dental facilities. But it's been like that feeling of abject terror of systemic abuses and negligence and general incompetence mixed with sadism since I had my hysterectomy on the 30th of October 2007. And then we can go back in time to the dreadful birthing practices when I was birthing my daughters back in 1980, 1985 and 1987 respectively. So I've got a long history of... No, let's rewind further back in time to when I was yes, I was 6 and I sustained an injury, a very bad lump on my head from a little boy threw the Sunday school gate open and it smashed right into my head. And I was abused by a nurse when I was waiting to have, was actually under observation during the night, but waiting to have the scan done over my head to see if I'd sustained any serious concussion or brain damage, which I probably did sustain actually. They never did tell me what, as a child I was never informed what actually happened, what effects it had on my young, fragile, growing brain. But anyway, look, that was an event that was very nasty. So anytime I'm vulnerable and at the mercy of other people and authority figures like doctors, professors, nurses, dentists, dental assistants, I mentally spiral, and it's because of the long history of various systemic abuses. So it's not irrational to feel the way I do right now, but I'm just containing it and holding it together, and having that infected dying tooth removed will relieve some pressure on my jaw, and then they still need to do the top one, and they may need to take out this broken one as well, although I'm hoping they'll just patch that. And then there's the one next to the dying one that needs fillings. So I just can only pray that they actually treat everything properly and remove the systemic ongoing infection that was left for 18 months, and I was gaslighted last time, sent home with fancy little dental brushes and told I should floss properly and all this rubbish, when actually, years of psych medication and bruxism from trauma and stress and attacks on my throat as a young woman, and years of I guess we've had 6 years of shedding from the COVIDian madness, have all impacted on my teeth. It's not flossing that's gone wrong, people of Earth. It's, years of things put in our water, for example. Although the fluoride may have protected my teeth, I seriously doubt it though. Don't look very protected at all, so I'm having to lose teeth left, right and centre, like spitting out piano keys. So there is a kind of an undercurrent of rage that I've been left in this situation due to my level of poverty, and there's not one thing I can change or alter about it short of winning the lotto, which isn't going to happen, people of Earth. And anyway, I haven't even bought a ticket for a long time because it's just a waste of money, and all you're doing is buying fantasies, really. And although I'm the psychedelic dreamer, and I dream floridly most nights, I haven't dreamt for the last 3 nights. It's interesting because I was having intense dreams about my friend, my adopted brother. Well, I thought he was a brother to me, Jared, and some about my daughter, and it's been intense. It's like my mind precognitively goes over stuff when I'm about to go through an ordeal of medical interventions or dentistry. It's kind of a pre-evaluation of things, and in some ways it mitigates some of the trauma because my mind's kind of processed a lot of stuff before the event even happens. Preparing my mind, I guess, for the interferences in my core, my physical core. She doesn't like being interfered with. No one does. No one, unless there's some kind of, self-flagellating masochist. But anyway, mind you, they do exist, those types of people too. God knows, I've known them. It's horrific. Anyway, so I thought I would sit out in the garden because it's an absolutely beautiful day, and hopefully we don't get showered on like we did yesterday. And the birdie boys are happy. I'm going to see them. Kermie's busily chewing up his swing, and Bo's preening. He knows his name, doesn't he? And they're very happy little birdies. I really should be cleaning their cages because I normally do it on a Monday. But I thought, I'll read a story and I'll clean the cages after. It's not so bad. And if I don't, I won't be in a state to do it tomorrow unless I get up early in the morning to do it. And I like to stick to my routine and do it on Mondays, then I know they're done, they're cleaned up for the week. So I'll just have to, and I need to take myself off to the supermarket tonight. I'm going to, this afternoon or evening, I've got to buy some soft type foods that I can eat for the next few days. Might even buy just some soups because I just can't be bothered making soup or doing anything at the moment. Just don't really feel well. But I did cook up a big stir fry last night, but I won't be able to eat that for the next few days because, it's stir fried beef and it's chewy. But I'll have that tonight, and I've frozen one other dish down. So that was my dinner last night, and I didn't have Hokkien noodles that I like to have stir fried beef and vegetables and coconut cream with, so I just had it with rice. So tonight I'll just have that big bowl of that, and tomorrow I'm thinking jelly and ice cream and custard. Have a Tanya party. We call it, Jared and Crystal, my daughter, used to call it Tanya parties when I'm not well, can't be bothered cooking or just eat desserts. And but they'll have to be soft things. Jelly might be a bit cold because you're supposed to eat only things at room temperature for the first day after you have a tooth extraction. So yeah, that might be a bit of a shock to the system. Anyway, I'll think about it. I guess custard, if I cook up the custard tonight, I'll make it lactose-free with lactose-free milk, because the last custard I had after the root canal was a bought one, and was I violently ill the next day. So probably it was a custard, but it could have been from all the stress too. But I'll make a lactose-free custard. I'll be kind to my gut. And I'll just take it out of the fridge before eating, so it's not quite room temperature, but take the chill off. And I think that's what I'll be living like for the next few days. Oh well, it's not so bad. I really like custard, so it's not a punishment or anything. And of course I'll buy myself some chocolate because I can let that sit at room temperature and just gently suck on that just to buoy me up a bit mentally. I might even buy one of those little bought tiramisus because they're soft to eat too. All I can think about right now is Tanya parties and Miss 5 comfort feeding with pudding. It's why I'll never be a supermodel, people of Earth. You have to laugh. Oh, the crows are here. Hello, crow family. What are you doing? There's no food, I haven't topped it up. They're having a drink and a swim. Lovely birds. might just go quickly and put some food in there, otherwise they're going to nag us while I'm reading, and then I'm going to be torn between two masters. So be right back. Someone ate all the food, did they? Ooh. That was probably the possums last night. There you go, handsome birds. Let's say don't look after you. Right, so here we are again, happy as can be, swinging from a tree, living our best lives. Not literally swinging from a tree, people of Earth, although if it gets too much, it's always an option. But no, I'm not serious about that. I love my life. I fought hard to stay alive in spite of everything and everyone. And I deserve the best dentistry that money can buy, only I can't afford it. And I deserve the best that life can offer, monetarily or spiritually, emotionally, mentally, physically, as do we all, us living creatures, sentient beings here on planet Earth. So I'll just move through the next few days with as much aplomb as I can gather together and try and live my best life. I'm laughing because baby crow had a swim and now he's tussling himself and hopping up and down and throwing himself around. I'll show you. There he goes. He just flew off, but he was doing this almighty shake, and he loves his little swims, he does. So you see, even the birdies live their best lives here at Sacred Space. It's wonderful, isn't it? It really is truly wonderful. Because, you know, we're co-creating with the gods, and we're doing things that are under our control. I don't have a lot of money, but what I have I share with my beautiful, you know, ones that can't, you know, well, they can look after themselves, really. They're wild birds, but, you know, I just help them out a little bit, give them extra food, and I tell you what, they appreciate it. They appreciate it. They let me know. They let me know when their bowl is empty. And they all come now, the turkeys, the crows, and if I forget to put the food away, the possums at night are partaking of it, I'm sure. Is that good, boys? Is that good? My sweet little darlings. Right, so let us begin. We're 18 minutes in, so Mama T's got to get with the program, am I right? Reading Spring in Fialta by Vladimir Nabokov. Would you believe it? It looks like we've got showers coming over, but I checked the Bureau of Meteorology and it said it would be sunny today. See? Can't rely on them. I think it'll be fine though. I said that yesterday and then ran in the house in panic, and it was fine after, and we didn't need to panic, but oh well. Got to go with the flow. Hopefully there won't be any fire alarms tomorrow in the middle of my tooth extraction. Dear Goddess. What are you doing, Kermie? Don't chew that up. That's for you to sit on. Yes. You weird little bird. Oh well. It's, you know, foraging behaviours, and they need to chew. They're parrots. Right. Let us begin. Spring in Fialta is cloudy and dull. Everything is damp. the piebald trunks of the plane trees, the juniper shrubs, the railings, the gravel. Far away in a watery vista between the jagged edges of pale bluish houses, which have tottered up from their knees to climb the slope, a cypress indicating the way. The blurred Mount St. George is more than ever remote from its likeness on the picture postcards, which since 1910, say, those straw hats, those youthful cabmen, have been courting the tourist from the sorry go-round of their prop among amethyst-toothed lumps of rock and the mantelpiece streams of seashells. The air is windless and warm, with a faint tang of burning. But you know, it was just so perfect when I first came out here 21 minutes ago, and now the wind's blowing up, and it's bizarre, isn't it? It's been like that now for 2 days. Right. The sea, its salt drowned in a solution of rain, is less glaucous than grey, with waves too sluggish to break into foam. It was on such a day in the early 30s that I found myself, all my senses wide open, on one of Fialta's steep little streets, taking in everything at once. That marine rococo on the stand and the coral crucifixes in a shop window and the dejected poster of a visiting circus, one corner of its drenched paper detached from the wall and a yellow bit of unripe orange peel on the old slate blue sidewalk, which retained here and there a fading memory of ancient mosaic design. I am fond of Fialta. I'm fond of it because I feel in the hollow of those violaceous syllables. Violaceous syllables. The sweet, dark dampness of the most rumpled of small flowers, and because the alto-like name of a lovely Crimean town is echoed by its viola, and also because there is something in the very somnolence of its humid Lent that especially anoints one's soul. I think Lent is a Catholic or Russian Orthodox holiday that happens before Easter, is it not? I think it is. I think we're probably in Lent now if we're Catholic. I'm Jewish, so 1st of April is the evening, is the first day of Passover. I'll still probably be recovering from this, but I'm tempted to go and ask to go to a Seder, but they're fairly expensive to go to. Most people wouldn't know me, so it'd probably be safe to go now, but I'm tempted to actually go for a Seder somewhere, celebrate Passover this year, in gratitude to the Holy One and all manifestations for healing my mind, body and spirit. Right. So I was happy to be there again, to trudge uphill in inverse direction to the rivulet of the gutter, hatless, my head wet, my skin already suffused with warmth, although I wore only a light mackintosh over my shirt. My hair's falling out and shedding too. Oh, dear goddess. I had come on the Kapara Bella Express. That's interesting. We have a suburb here where I had my business, 31 years ago, called Capella Bar. It's a little bit of a similar sound, isn't it? This is Kapara Bella Express, which, with that reckless gusto peculiar to trains in mountainous country, had done its thundering best to collect throughout the night as many tunnels as possible. A day or two, just as long as a breathing spell in the midst of a business trip would allow me, was all I expected to stay. I had left my wife and children at home, and that was an island of happiness always present in the clear north of my being, always floating beside me and even through me, I dare say, but yet keeping on the outside of me most of the time. A pantless infant of the male sex, with a taut mud-grey little belly, jerkily stepped down from a doorstep and waddled off, bow-legged, trying to carry 3 oranges at once, but continuously dropping the variable third, until he fell himself, and then a girl of 12 or so, with a string of heavy beads around her dusky neck and wearing a skirt as long as that of a gypsy, promptly took away the whole lot with her more nimble and more numerous hands. Nearby, on the wet terrace of a cafe, a waiter was wiping the slabs of tables. A melancholy brigand hawking local lollipops, elaborate-looking things with a lunar gloss, had placed a hopelessly full basket on the cracked balustrade over which the two were conversing. Either the drizzle had stopped, or Fialta had got so used to it that she herself did not know whether she was breathing moist air or warm rain. A thumb filling his pipe from a rubber pouch as he walked, a plus-forward Englishman of the solid, exportable sort, came from under an arch and entered a pharmacy, where large pale sponges in a blue vase were dying a thirsty death behind their glass. What luscious elation I felt rippling through my veins. How gratefully my whole being responded to the flutters and effluvia of that grey day, saturated with a vernal essence, which itself, it seemed, slow in perceiving. My nerves were unusually receptive after a sleepless night. I assimilated everything. The whistling of a thrush in the almond trees beyond the chapel, the peace of the crumbling houses, the pulse of the distant sea panting in the mist, all this together with the jealous green of bottle glass bristling along the top of the wall and the fast colours of a circus advertisement featuring a feathered Indian on a raring horse in the act of lassoing a boldly endemic zebra, while some thoroughly fooled elephants sat brooding upon their star-spangled thrones. Presently the same Englishman overtook me. As I absorbed him along with the rest, I happened to notice the sudden side roll of his big blue eye straining at its crimson canthus, and the way he rapidly moistened his lips. because of the dryness of those sponges, I thought. But then I followed the direction of his glance and saw Nina. Every time I met her during the 15 years of I failed to find the precise term for our kind of relationship. She had not seemed to recognize me at once, and this time too, she remained quite still for a moment on the opposite sidewalk, half turning toward me in sympathetic incertitude mixed with curiosity, only her yellow scarf already on the move, like those dogs that recognize you before their owners do. And then she uttered a cry, her hands up, all her 10 fingers dancing, and in the middle of the street, with merely the frank impulsiveness of an old friendship, just as she would rapidly make the sign of the cross over me every time we parted. She kissed me thrice with more mouth than meaning, and then walked beside me, hanging on to me, adjusting her stride to mine, hampered by her narrow brown skirt perfunctorily slit down the side. "Oh yes, Ferdy is here too," she replied, and immediately in her turn inquired nicely after Elena. "Must be loafing somewhere around with Sigur," she went on in reference to her husband. "And I have some shopping to do. We leave after lunch. Wait a minute. Where are you leading me, Victor dear?" Back into the past. Back into the past, as I did every time I met her, repeating the whole accumulation of the plot from the very beginning up to the last increment. Thus, in the Russian fairy tales, the already told is bunched up again at every new turn of the story. This time, we had met in warm and misty Fialta, and I could not have celebrated the occasion with greater art, could not have adorned with brighter vignettes the list of fate's former services, even if I had known that this was to be the last one, I maintain, for I cannot imagine any heavenly firm of brokers that might consent to arrange me a meeting with her beyond the grave. That is so beautifully put. In other words, he has nothing but unclean thoughts towards her, people of earth. Oh, you have to laugh. My introductory scene with Nina had been laid in Russia quite a long time ago, around 1917, I should say, judging by certain left-wing theatre rumblings backstage. It was at some birthday party on my aunt's on her country estate near Luga, in the deepest folds of winter. How well I remember the first sign of nearing the place, the red barn in a white wilderness. Are you having a good time, birdie boys? Where's Baby Crow? Oh, here he comes. Oh no, Baby Crow was there. It was Mama Crow that flew down. All right. You're very good birdies. Very good birdies indeed. I had just graduated from the Imperial Lyceum. Nina was already engaged, although she was of my age and of that of the century she looked 20 at least, and this in spite or perhaps because of her neat slender build, whereas at 32 that very slightness of hers made her look younger. Her fiancé was a guardsman on leave from the front, a handsome, heavy fellow, incredibly well-bred and stolid, who weighed every word on the scales of the most exact common sense, and spoke in a velvety baritone, which grew even smoother when he addressed her. His decency and devotion probably got on her nerves, and he is now a successful, if somewhat lonesome, engineer in a most distant tropical country. Windows light up and stretch their luminous lengths upon the dark, billowy snow, making room for the reflection of the fan-shaped light above the front door between them. Each of the two side pillars is fluffily fringed with white, which rather spoils the lines of what might have been a perfect ex libris for the book of our two lives. I cannot recall why we all wandered out of the sonorous hall into the still darkness, peopled only with firs, snow swollen to twice their size. Did the watchman invite us to look at a sullen red glow in the sky, portent of nearing arson? Possibly. Did we go to admire an equestrian statue of ice sculptured near the pond by the Swiss tutor of my cousins? Quite as likely. My memory revives only on the way back to the brightly symmetrical mansion toward which we tramped in single file along a narrow furrow between snowbanks, with that crunch, 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 which is the only comment that a taciturn winter night makes upon humans. I walked last. 3 singing steps ahead of me walked a small, bent shape. The firs gravely showed their burdened paws. I slipped and dropped the dead flashlight someone had forced upon me. It was devilishly hard to retrieve, and instantly attracted by my curses with an eager, low laugh in anticipation of fun, Nina dimly veered toward me. Oh my goodness, why are they still feeding you? You're nearly as big as they are. My goodness. Yes, I'm talking to you, baby crow. I'm going to call you Indigo, 'cause you're indignant all the time, and you're so black you're almost blue. Shall we call him Indigo? Oh, you have to laugh. I'm being stalked by a horsefly, which bite me. I missed him. He's probably already bitten me somewhere. Right. Indigo, Indigo. Probably shouldn't name the crows. They're not mine. They belong to sacred space. But on the other hand, they talk to me and I feed them, so they're friends. So I should name them. Right. I call her Nina, but I could hardly have known her name yet. Hardly could we have had time, she and I, for any preliminary. "Who's that?" she asked with interest, and I was already kissing her neck, smooth and quite fiery hot from the long fox fur of her coat collar, which kept getting into my way until she clasped my shoulder, and with a candour so peculiar to her gently fitted, her generous, dutiful lips to mine. Well, the Russians are passionate people and affectionate when they're not being dour and stolid and cantankerous and powerful and irritated by life, you know. Swings and roundabouts on every nationality of the individual person, I suppose. Oh, you're really destroying that seagrass, and seagrass is expensive to replace, Mr. Kermie. Says, "I don't care, Mama too." I priced carding cloth today because someone posted that they made their own blending board for fleece when you brush it out, and so I thought, oh, I can do that too. They just stapled it to a wooden chopping board, you know. But I can do that. I've got spare chopping boards I could utilise. And but the carding cloth coming from America was only $26, but the charge was $65 for postage. Like, what the hell? So it was $85 to get it sent to Australia, and I thought it's still cheaper than buying a ready-made blending board, which they charge $279 for. But I thought, that's just mad. So I'm thinking about what I'm going to do about that, if I'm going to bother with that. $85. And then you can buy on Amazon blending boards already made for about $41. So I guess it's cheap to just buy one that's already made. I thought by making my own, it'll save a bit of money, and then I can have the satisfaction of having made my own. But that's just nonsensical. It really is nonsensical, all of it. Throws me into a bit of a loop trying to work out which is the best course of action. But I'm not well with my teeth, so I'm not making any, major purchases at the moment. And I'm not quite with it. I'm not quite cycling through sacred space on all 4 cylinders. People are there. But anyhow. But suddenly, parting us by its explosion of gaiety, the theme of a snowball fight started in the dark, and someone, fleeing, falling, crunching, laughing and panting, climbed a drift, tried to run, and uttered a horrible groan. Deep snow had performed the amputation of an Arctic. And soon after, we all dispersed to our respective homes without my having talked with Nina, nor made any plans about the future, about those 15 itinerant years that had already set out toward the dim horizon, loaded with the parts of our unassembled meetings. And as I watched her in the maze of gestures and shadows of gestures, of which the rest of that evening consisted, probably parlour games, with Nina persistently in the other camp, I was astonished, I remember, not so much by her inattention to me after that warmth in the snow, as by the innocent naturalness of that inattention, for I did not yet know that had I said a word, it would have changed at once into a wonderful sunburst of kindness, a cheerful, compassionate attitude with all possible cooperation, as if woman's love were spring water containing salubrious salts, which, at the least notice, she ever so willingly gave anyone to drink. Let me see, where did we last meet? I began, addressing the Fialta version of Nina, in order to bring to her small face with prominent cheekbones and dark red lips a certain expression I knew. And sure enough, the shake of her head and the puckered brow seemed less to imply forgetfulness than to deplore the flatness of an old joke, or, to be more exact, it was as if all those cities where fate had fixed our various rendezvous without ever attending them personally, all those platforms and stairs and three-walled rooms and dark back alleys were trite settings remaining after some other lives, all brought to a close long before, and were so little related to the acting out of our own aimless destiny that it was almost bad taste to mention them. I accompanied her into a shop under the arcades. There, in the twilight beyond a beaded curtain, she fingered some red leather purses stuffed with tissue paper, peering at the price tags as if wishing to learn their museum names. She wanted, she said, exactly that shape, but in form, and when, after 10 minutes of frantic rustling, the old Dalmatian found such a freak by a miracle that has puzzled me ever since, Nina, who was about to pick some money out of my hand, changed her mind and went through the streaming beads without having bought anything. Outside, it was just as milky dull as before, the same smell of burning, stirring my Tartar memories, drifted from the bare windows of the pale houses. A small swarm of gnats was busy darning the air above a mimosa, which bloomed listlessly, her sleeves trailing to the very ground. Two workmen in broad-brimmed hats were lunching on cheese and garlic, their backs against a circus billboard which depicted a red hussar and an orange tiger of sorts. Curious, in his effort to make the beast as ferocious as possible, the artist had gone so far that he had come back from the other side, for the tiger's face looked positively human. Au fond, I wanted a comb, said Nina, with belated regret. How familiar to me were her hesitations, second thoughts, third thoughts, mirroring first ones, ephemeral worries between trains. She had always either just arrived or was about to leave, and of this I find it hard to think without feeling humiliated by the variety of intricate routes one feverishly follows in order to keep that final appointment which the most confirmed dawdler knows to be unavoidable. Had I to submit before judges of our earthly existence a specimen of her average pose, I would have perhaps placed her leaning upon a counter at Cook's, left calf crossing right shin, a left toe tapping floor, sharp elbows and coin-spilling bag on the counter, while the employee, pencil in hand, pondered with her over the plan of an eternal sleeping car. After the exodus from Russia, I saw her, and that was the second time, in Berlin at the house of some friends. I was about to get married. She had just broken with her fiancé. As I entered that room, I caught sight of her at once, and, having glanced at the other guests, I instinctively determined which of the men knew more about her than I. It's amazing how men have that sense, isn't it? And by a mere glance. She was sitting on the corner of a couch, her feet pulled up, her small, comfortable body folded in the shape of a Z. An ashtray stood aslant on the couch near one of her heels, and having squinted at me and listened to my name, she removed her stalk-like cigarette holder from her lips and proceeded to utter slowly and joyfully, "Well, of all people!" And at once it became clear to everyone, beginning with her, that we had long been on intimate terms. Unquestionably, she had forgotten all about the actual kiss, but somehow, because of that trivial occurrence, she found herself recollecting a vague sketch of warm, pleasant friendship, which in reality had never existed between us. Thus, the whole cast of our relationship was fraudulently based upon an imaginary amity, which had nothing to do with her random goodwill. Our meeting proved quite insignificant in regard to the words we said, but already no barriers divided us. And when that night I happened to be seated beside her at supper, I shamelessly tested the extent of her secret patience. And then she vanished again, and a year later my wife and I were seeing my brother off to Posen, which is where my great-grandmother came from. And when the train had gone, and we were moving toward the exit along the other side of the platform, suddenly, near a car of the Paris Express, I saw Nina, her face buried in the bouquet she held, in the midst of a group of people whom she had befriended without my knowledge, and who stood in a circle, gaping at her as idlers gape at a street row. A lost child, or the victim, a street row, a lost child, or the victim of an accident. Brightly she signalled to me with her flowers. I introduced her to Elena, and in that life-quickening atmosphere of a big railway station, where everything is something trembling on the brink of something else, thus to be clutched and cherished, the exchange of a few words was enough to enable two totally dissimilar women to start calling each other by their pet names the very next time they met. That day, In the blue shade of the Paris car, Ferdinand was first mentioned. I learned with a ridiculous pang that she was about to marry him. Doors were beginning to slam. She quickly but piously kissed her friends, climbed into the vestibule. It disappeared. And then I saw her through the glass, settling herself in her compartment, having suddenly forgotten about us, or passed into another world. And we all, our hands in our pockets, seemed to be spying upon an utterly unsuspecting life moving in that aquarium dimness, until she grew aware of us and drummed on the window pane, then raised her eyes, fumbling at the frame as if hanging a picture. But nothing happened. Some fellow passenger helped her, and she leaned out, audible and real, beaming with pleasure. One of us, keeping up with the stealthily gliding car, handed her a magazine and a Tauchnitz. She read English only when travelling. All was slipping away with beautiful smoothness, and I held a platform ticket crumpled beyond recognition, while a song of the last century, connected, it has been rumoured, with some Parisian drama of love, kept ringing and ringing in my head, having emerged, God knows why, from the music box of memory. A sobbing ballad, which often used to be sung by an old maiden aunt of mine, with a face as yellow as Russian church wax, but whom nature had given such a powerful, ecstatically full voice that it seemed to swallow her up in the glory of a fiery cloud as she would begin. On dit que tu t'es marié, tu sais que j'en vais mourir. And that melody, the pain, the offence, the link between hymen and death, evoked by the rhythm, and the voice itself of the dead singer, which accompanied the recollection as the sole owner of the song, gave me no rest for several hours after Nina's departure, and even later arose at increasing intervals, like the last flat little waves sent to the beach by a passing ship, lapping ever more infrequently and dreamily, or like the bronze agony of a vibrating belfry after the bell ringer has already reseated himself in the cheerful circle of his family. And another year or two later, I was in Paris on business, and one morning on the landing of a hotel where I had been looking up a film actor fellow, there she was again, clad in a grey tailored suit, waiting for the elevator to take her down, a key dangling from her fingers. Ferdinand has gone fencing, she said conversationally. Her eyes rested on the lower part of my face, as if she were lip reading. And after a moment of reflection, her amatory comprehension was matchless. She turned and, rapidly swaying on slender ankles, led me along the sea-blue carpeted passage. A chair at the door of her room supported a tray with the remains of breakfast, a honey-stained knife, crumbs on the grey porcelain, but the room had already been done, and because of our sudden draught, a wave of muslin embroidered with white dahlias got sucked in with a shudder and knock between the responsive halves of the French window, and only when the door had been locked did they let go that curtain with something like a blissful sigh. And a little later, I stepped out on the diminutive cast iron balcony beyond to inhale a combined smell of dry maple leaves and gasoline, the dregs of the hazy blue morning street. And as I did not yet realize the presence of that growing morbid pathos which was to embitter so my subsequent meetings with Nina, I was probably quite as collected and carefree as she was, when from the hotel I accompanied her to some office or other to trace a suitcase she had lost, and thence to the cafe where her husband was holding session with his court of the moment. I'm a bit thirsty, I might need to get another drink. My face feels all drawn tight like a death mask. Be careful what you wish for, people of Earth. Dear Goddess. I will not mention the name, but what bits of it I happen to give here appear in decorous disguise, of that man, that Franco-Hungarian writer. I would rather not dwell upon him at all, but I cannot help it. He is surging from under my pen. Today one does not hear much about him, and this is good, for it proves that I was right in resisting his evil spell, right in experiencing a creepy chill down my spine whenever this or that new book of his touched my hand. The fame of his likes circulates briskly, but soon grows heavy and stale. Excuse me. And as for history, it will limit his life story to the dash between two dates. Lean and arrogant, with some poisonous pun ever ready to fork out and quiver at you, and with a strange look of expectancy in his dull brown veiled eyes. This false wag had, I dare say, an irresistible effect on small rodents. Having mastered the art of the verbal invention to perfection, he particularly prided himself on being a weaver of words, a title he valued higher than that of a writer. Personally, I never could understand what was the good of thinking up books, of penning things that had not really happened in some way or other. And I remember once saying to him, as I braved the mockery of his encouraging nods, that were I a writer, I should allow only my heart to have imagination, and for the rest rely upon memory, that long sunset shadow of one's personal truth. I had known his books before I knew him. A vague disgust was already replacing the aesthetic pleasure which I had suffered his first novel to give me. At the beginning of his career, it had been possible, perhaps, to distinguish some human landscape, some old garden, some dream-familiar disposition of trees through the stained glass of his prodigious prose. But with each a new book, the tints grew still more dense, the gules and purpures still more ominous. And today, one can no longer see anything at all through that blazoned, ghastly rich glass. And it seems that, or were one to break it, nothing but a perfectly black void would face one's shivering soul. But how dangerous he was in his prime, what venom he squirted, with what whips he lashed when provoked. The tornado of his passing satire left a barren waste where felled oaks lay in a row, and the dust still twisted, and the unfortunate author of some adverse review, howling with pain, spun like a top in the dust. At the time we met, his Passage à Niveau was being acclaimed in Paris. He was, as they say, surrounded. And Nina, whose adaptability was an amazing substitute for the culture she lacked, had already assumed, if not the part of a muse, at least that of a soulmate and subtle advisor. Following Ferdinand's creative convolutions and loyally sharing his artistic tastes. For although it is wildly improbable that she had ever waded through a single volume of his, she had a magic knack of gleaning all the best passages from the shop talk of literary friends. Crawled on by something. Can't see it now. Something was crawling on me though. My own hair. There it is. Right. An orchestra of women was playing when we entered the cafe. At first, I noted the ostrich thigh of a harp reflected in one of the mirror-faced pillars, and then I saw the composite table, the small ones drawn together to form a long one, at which, with his back to the plush wall, a Ferdinand was presiding, and for a moment his whole attitude, the position of his parted hands, and the faces of his table companions, all turned toward him, reminded me in a grotesque, nightmarish way of something I did not quite grasp. But when I did so, in retrospect, the suggested comparison struck me as hardly less sacrilegious than the nature of his art himself. He wore a white turtleneck sweater under a tweed coat. His glossy hair was combed back from the temples, and above it, cigarette smoke hung like a halo. His bony, pharaoh-like face was motionless, The eyes alone roved this way and that, full of dim satisfaction. What you doing, Cammy boy? The crows have been and gone. They were very happy, busy birdies, weren't they? Yes, they were. Having forsaken the 2 or 3 obvious haunts where naive amateurs of Montparnassian life would have expected to find him, he had started patronising this perfectly bourgeois establishment because of his peculiar sense of humour, which made him derive ghoulish fun from the pitiful spécialité de la maison, this orchestra composed of half a dozen weary-looking, self-conscious ladies interlacing mild harmonies on a crammed platform and not knowing, as he put it, what to do with their motherly bosoms, quite superfluous in the world of music. And not superfluous, they are the music. Buddha boom, Buddha boom, Buddha boom, 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 boom. Never mind. After each number, he would be convulsed by a fit of epileptic applause, which the ladies had stopped acknowledging, and which was already arousing, I thought, certain doubts in the minds of the proprietor of the cafe and its fundamental customers, but which seemed highly diverting to Ferdinand's friends. Among these, I recall, an artist with an impeccably bald, though slightly chipped head, which under various pretexts he constantly painted into his eye and guitar canvases. Eye and guitar canvases. A poet whose special gag was the ability to represent, if you asked him, Adam's fall by means of 5 matches. A humble businessman who financed surrealist ventures and paid for the aperitifs. If permitted to print in a corner eulogistic allusions to the actress he kept. A pianist, presentable insofar as the face was concerned, but with a dreadful expression of the fingers. A jaunty but linguistically impotent Soviet writer fresh from Moscow, with an old pipe and a new wristwatch, who was completely and ridiculously unaware of the sort of company he was in. There were several other gentlemen present who have become confused in my memory, and doubtless 2 or 3 of the lot had been intimate with Nina. She was the only woman at the table. There she stooped, eagerly sucking at a straw, the level of her lemonade sinking with a kind of childish celerity, and only when the last drop had been gurgled and squeaked, and she had pushed away the straw with her tongue, only then did I finally catch her eye, which I had been obstinately seeking, as still not being able to cope with the fact that she had had time to forget what had occurred earlier in the morning, to forget it so thoroughly that upon meeting my glance, she replied with a blank, questioning smile. and only after peering more closely did she remember suddenly what kind of answering smile I was expecting. Meanwhile, Ferdinand, the ladies having temporarily left the platform after pushing away their instruments like so many pieces of furniture, was juicily drawing his cronies' attention to the figure of an elderly luncher in the far corner of the cafe, who had, as some Frenchmen for some reason or other have, a little red ribbon or something on his coat lapel, and whose grey beard combined with his moustaches to form a cosy yellowish nest for his sloppily or munching mouth. But somehow the trappings of old age always amused Ferdy. I did not stay long in Paris, but that week proved sufficient to engender between him and me that fake chumminess, the imposing of which he had such a talent for. Subsequently, I even turned out to be of some use to him. My firm acquired the film rights of one of his more intelligible stories, and then he had a good time pestering me with telegrams. As the years passed, we found ourselves every now and then beaming at each other in some place, but I never felt at ease in his presence, and that day in Fialta too I experienced a familiar depression upon learning that he was on the prowl nearby. One thing, however, always cheered me up: the flop of his recent play. And here he was, coming toward us, garbed in an absolutely waterproof coat with belt and pocket flaps, a camera on his shoulder, double rubber soles to his shoes, sucking with an imperturbability that was meant to be funny, a long stick of moonstone candy, that speciality of Fialta's. I have to say, he really is a brilliant writer. He really is. I feel quite soul-nourished. On we go, people of Earth. Beside him walked the dapper, doll-like Rosie Sigur, a lover of art and a perfect fool. I never could discover for what purpose Ferdinand needed him, and I still hear Nina explaining with a moaning tenderness that did not commit her to anything. Oh, he is such a darling, Sigur. As they approached, Ferdinand and I greeted each other lustily, trying to crowd into handshake and backslap as much of fervour as possible, and knowing by experience that actually that was all but pretending it was only a preface, and it always happened like that. After every separation, we met to the accompaniment of strings being excitedly tuned in a bustle of geniality, and the hubbub of sentiments taking their seats. But the ushers would close the doors, and after that, no one was admitted. Sigur complained to me about the weather, and at first I did not understand what he was talking about, even if the moist grey greenhouse essence of Fialta might be called weather. It was just as much outside of anything that could serve us as a topic of conversation as was, for instance, Nina's slender elbow, which I was holding between finger and thumb, were a bit of tin foil someone had dropped, shining in the middle of the cobbled street in the distance. We four moved on, the vague purchases still looming ahead. God, what an Indian! Ferdinand suddenly exclaimed with fierce relish, violently nudging me and pointing at a poster. Farther on, near a fountain, he gave his stick of candy to a native child, a swarthy girl with beads round her pretty neck. We stopped to wait for him. He crouched, saying something to her, addressing her sooty black lowered eyelashes. And then he caught up with us, grinning and making one of those remarks with which he loved to spice his speech. Then his attention was drawn by an unfortunate object exhibited in a souvenir shop, a dreadful marble imitation of Mount St. George, showing a dark tunnel at its base, which turned out to be the mouth of an inkwell, and with a compartment for pens and the semblance of railroad tracks. Open-mouthed, quivering, all agog with sardonic triumph, he turned that dusty, cumbersome, and perfectly irresponsible thing in his hands, paid without bargaining, and with his mouth still open, came out carrying the monster. Like some autocrat who surrounds himself with hunchbacks and dwarfs, he would become attached to this or that hideous object. This infatuation might last from 5 minutes to several days, or even longer if the thing happened to be animate. Nina wistfully alluded to lunch, and seizing the opportunity when Ferdinand and Sigur stopped at a post office, I hastened to lead her away. I still wonder what exactly she meant to me, that small, dark woman with the narrow shoulders and lyrical limbs, to quote the expression of a mincing émigré poet, one of the few men who had sighed platonically after her. And still less do I understand what was the purpose of fate in bringing us constantly together. I did not see her for quite a long while after my sojourn in Paris. And then one day, when I came home from my office, I found her having tea with my wife and examining on her silk-hosed hand, with her wedding ring gleaming through, the texture of some stockings bought cheap in Tauentzienstrasse. Tauentzienstrasse. Jawohl. I threw that in. Once I was shown her photograph in a fashion magazine full of autumn leaves and gloves and wind-swept golf links. On a certain Christmas, she sent me a picture postcard with snow and stars. On a Riviera beach, she almost escaped my notice behind her dark glasses and terracotta tan. Another day, having dropped in on an ill-timed errand at the house of some strangers where a party was in progress, I saw her scarf and fur coat among alien scarecrows on a coat rack. Sorry, a little segue there. My teeth feel all, this one feels all tight and stinging and almost burning, and I'm just going to ignore it, people are there. Just going to ignore it. Whistle Dixie till I die. It's probably a bad analogy, you know. The northerners and the southerners of America. I don't know where I extrapolate some of these similes from. It's a bit fucking crazy, probably makes me a lot of enemies. It's not meant with any disrespect to either race or culture, people of Earth. Just in pain, drifting, and I don't want to go home right now, so I'm fighting while I'm drifting. How am I fighting? On my chair in my garden with my birds, reading stories when I could justifiably just lie in bed and wait for death like I used to in the good old days. But Santa Muerte has been leading me a merry tango for decades now, and frankly I can't take it seriously anymore, even in the face of my own fractious, fragmented health. It all just becomes stuff and nonsense. Ask me how I'll think about that tomorrow, people of Earth. Fuck. Anyway, in a bookshop, she nodded to me from a page of one of her husband's stories, a page referring to an episodic servant girl, but smuggling in Nina in spite of the author's intention. Her face, he wrote, was rather nature's snapshot than a meticulous portrait, so that when tried to imagine it, all he could visualize were fleeting glimpses of disconnected features, the downy outline of her pomettes in the sun, the amber-tinted brown darkness of quick eyes, lips shaped into a friendly smile, which was always ready to change into an ardent kiss. Again and again, she hurriedly appeared in the margins of my life, without influencing in the least its basic text. Ow! One summer morning, Friday, because housemaids were thumping out carpets in the sun-dusted yard, my family was away in the country, and I was lolling and smoking in bed when I heard the bell ring with tremendous violence, and there she was in the hall, having burst in to leave, incidentally, a hairpin and, mainly, a trunk illuminated with hotel labels, which a fortnight later was retrieved for her by a nice Austrian boy who, according to intangible but sure symptoms, belonged to the same very cosmopolitan association of which I was a member. Occasionally, in the middle of a conversation, her name would be mentioned. She would run down the steps of a chance sentence without turning her head. While travelling in the Pyrenees, I spent a week at the chateau belonging to people with whom she and Ferdinand happened to be staying. And I shall never forget my first night there. How I waited, how certain I was that, without my having to tell her, she would steal to my room. How she did not come, and the din thousands of crickets made in the delirious depth of the rocky garden dripping with moonlight, the mad bubbling brooks, and my struggle between blissful southern fatigue after a long day of hunting on the screes, and the wild thirst for her stealthy, coming, low laugh. Pink ankles above the swan's down trimming of high-heeled slippers. But the night raved on, and she did not come. And when, next day, in the course of a general ramble in the mountains, I told her of my waiting, she clasped her hands in dismay and at once, with a rapid glance, estimated whether the backs of the gesticulating Ferd and his friend had sufficiently receded. I remember talking to her on the telephone across half of Europe on her husband's business and not recognising at first her eager barking voice, and I remember once dreaming of her. I dreamt that my eldest girl had run in to tell me the doorman was sorely in trouble, and when I had gone down to him, I saw, lying on a trunk, a roll of burlap under her head, pale-lipped and wrapped in a woolen kerchief. Nina, fast asleep, as miserable refugees sleep in God-forsaken railway stations. And regardless of what happened to me or to her in between, we never discussed anything, as we never thought of each other during the intervals in our destiny, so that when we met, the pace of life altered at once. All its atoms were recombined, and we lived in another, lighter time medium, which was measured not by the lengthy separations, but by those few meetings of which a short, supposedly frivolous life was thus artificially formed. And with each new meeting, I grew more and more apprehensive. No, I did not experience any inner emotional collapse. The shadow of tragedy did not haunt our revels. My married life remained unimpaired, while, on the other hand, her eclectic husband ignored her casual affairs, although deriving some profit from them in the way of pleasant and useful connections. Have to think about that. I grew apprehensive because something lovely, delicate and unrepeatable was being wasted, something which I abused by snapping off poor bright bits in gross haste, while neglecting the modest but a true core which perhaps it kept offering me in a pitiful whisper. I was apprehensive because, in the long run, I was somehow accepting Nina's life, the lies, the futility, the gibberish of that life. Even in the absence of any sentimental discord, I felt myself bound to seek for a rational, if not moral, interpretation of my existence. And this meant choosing between the world in which I sat for my portrait, with my wife, my young daughters, the Doberman Pinscher, idyllic garlands, a signet ring, a slender cane, between that happy, wise, and good world, and what? Was there any practical chance of life together with Nina? Life I could barely imagine, for it would be penetrated, I knew, with a passionate, intolerable bitterness, and every moment of it would be aware of a past teeming with prolean partners. No, the thing was absurd. And moreover, was she not chained to her husband by something stronger than love, the staunch friendship between two convicts? Absurd! But then, what should I have done with you, Nina? How should I have disposed of the store of sadness that had gradually accumulated as a result of our seemingly carefree, but really hopeless meetings? The Fialta consists of the old town and of the new one. Here and there, past and present are interlaced, struggling either to disentangle themselves or to thrust each other out. Each one has its own methods. The newcomer fights honestly, importing palm trees, setting up smart tourist agencies, painting with creamy lines the red smoothness of tennis courts. Whereas the sneaky old-timer creeps out from behind a corner in the shape of some little street on crutches, or the steps of stairs leading nowhere. On our way to the hotel, we passed a half-built white villa, full of litter within, on a wall of which again the same elephants, their monstrous baby knees wide apart, sat on huge gaudy drums. In ethereal bundles, the equestrienne, already with a penciled moustache, was resting on a broad-backed steed, and a tomato-nosed clown was walking a tightrope, balancing an umbrella ornamented with those recurrent stars, a vague, symbolic recollection of the heavenly fatherland of circus performers. Here in the Riviera part of Fialta, the wet gravel crunched in a more luxurious manner, and the lazy sighing of the sea was more audible. In the backyard of the hotel, a kitchen boy armed with a knife was pursuing a hen, which was clucking madly as it raced for its life. A bootblack offered me his ancient throne with a toothless smile. Under the plane trees stood a motorcycle of German make, a mud-bespattered limousine, and a yellow, long-bodied Icarus that looked like a giant scarab. "That's ours." "Cigars, I mean," said Nina, adding, "Why don't you come with us, Victor?" Although she knew very well that I could not come. In the lacquer of its elytra, a gouache of sky and branches was engulfed. In the metal of one of the bomb-shaped lamps, we ourselves were momentarily reflected. Lean, filmland pedestrians passing along the convex surface. And then, after a few steps, I glanced back and foresaw, in an almost optical sense, as it were, what really happened an hour or so later. The three of them wearing motoring helmets, getting in, smiling and waving to me, transparent to me like ghosts, with the colour of the world shining through them. And then they were moving, receding. I feel like I've got another ant there, but I can't see it. There was an ant on me before though, so my skin's not crawling or anything. The ants are real, people of Earth. And then they were moving, receding, diminishing. Nina's last 10-fingered farewell, but actually the automobile was still standing quite motionless, smooth and whole, like an egg. And Nina, under my outstretched arm, was entering a laurel-flanked doorway. And as we sat down, we could see, again, tapping me. Where is that little beastie? And Nina, under my outstretched arm, was entering a laurel-flanked doorway. And as we sat down, we could see through the window Ferdinand and Sigur, who had come by another way, slowly approaching. There was no one on the veranda where we lunched except the Englishman I had recently observed. In front of him, a long glass containing a bright crimson drink through an oval reflection on the tablecloth. In his eyes, I noticed the same bloodshot desire, but now it was in no sense related to Nina. That avid look was not directed at her at all, but was fixed on the upper right-hand corner of the broad window near which he was sitting. Having pulled the gloves off her small, thin hands, Nina, for the last time in her life, was eating the shellfish of which she was so fond. I roll my eyes at that, but I abhor shellfish. It's not her, it's me. Ferdinand, also, maybe if I ate more shellfish, I wouldn't be losing all my teeth. It's probably a zinc deficiency. It's probably something that was easily fixed. Doesn't bear thinking about, does it? And let's move on from that, people of Earth. Anyway, oh God, yes. EMF radiation. 5G. I am constantly filming or, uploading or watching videos on YouTube. It's self-inflicted suicide. It's a self-inflicted suicide. I'd say I want my teeth back, but it's an impossible dream at this stage. Like wanting my daughters back and my best friends back and wanting my world back and wanting a return to sanity and equilibrium and harmonic resonance and prosperity and peace and good health and vibrancy and joy and delight. trying. I just flipped you off. Why are you back? My goodness. They're really driving me crazy, these ants. Ferdinand also busied himself with food, and I took advantage of his hunger to begin a conversation which gave me the semblance of power over him. To be specific, I mentioned his recent failure. After a brief period of fashionable religious conversion, during which grace descended upon him, and he undertook some rather ambiguous pilgrimages, which ended in a decidedly scandalous adventure, he had turned his dull eyes toward barbarous Moscow. Now, frankly speaking, I have always been irritated by the complacent conviction that a ripple of stream consciousness, a few healthy obscenities, and a dash of communism in any old slop pail will alchemically and automatically produce ultra-modern literature, and I will contend until I am shot that art, as soon as it is brought into contact with politics, inevitably sinks to the level of any ideological trash. In Ferdinand's case, it is true, all this was rather irrelevant. The muscles of his muse were exceptionally strong, to say nothing of the fact that he didn't care a damn for the plight of the underdog, but because of certain obscurely mischievous undercurrents of that sort, his art had become still more repulsive. Except for a few snobs, none had understood the play. I had not seen it myself, but could well imagine that elaborate, Kremlin-esque night, along the impossible spirals of which he spun various wheels of dismembered symbols. And now, not without pleasure, I asked him whether he had read a recent bit of criticism about himself. "Criticism!" he exclaimed. "Fine criticism! Every slick jackanapes sees fit to read me a lecture. Ignorance of my work is their bliss. My books are touched gingerly as one touches something that may go bang. Criticism. They are examined from every point of view except the essential one. It is as if a naturalist, in describing the equine genus, started to jaw about saddles or Madame de Vie." He named a well-known literary hostess, who indeed strongly resembled a grinning horse, like that monster that poisoned all my former countrymen and women in New Zealand. "I would like some of that pigeon's blood too," he continued in the same loud, rippling voice, addressing the waiter, who understood his desire only after he had looked in the direction of the long-nailed finger which unceremoniously pointed at the Englishman's glass. For some reason or other, Sigur mentioned Ruby Rose, the lady who painted flowers on her breast. It's not such a bad idea. Maybe I should paint flowers on my jaw. Show them where the owie is. Oh, poor Mama T. And the conversation took on a less insulting character. Meanwhile, the big Englishman suddenly made up his mind, got up on a chair, stepped from there onto the windowsill, and stretched up till he reached that coveted corner of the frame where rested a compact furry moth, which he deftly slipped into a pillbox. Rather like Wouverman's white horse, said Ferdinand, in regard to something he was discussing with Sugur. Tu es très épique ce matin, remarked the latter. Soon they both left to telephone. Ferdinand was particularly fond of long-distance calls and particularly good at endowing them, no matter what the distance, with a friendly warmth when it was necessary, as for instance now to make sure of free lodgings. From afar came the sounds of music, a trumpet, a zither. Nina and I set out to wander again. The circus on its way to Fialta had apparently sent out runners. An advertising pageant was tramping by, but we did not catch its head as it had turned uphill into a side alley. The gilded back of some carriage was receding. A man in a burnous led a camel. A file of 4 mediocre Indians carried placards on poles, and behind them, by special permission, a tourist's small son in a sailor suit sat reverently on a tiny pony. We wandered by a cafe where the tables were now almost dry, but still empty. The waiter was examining, I hope he adopted it later, a horrible foundling, the absurd inkstand affair, stowed by Ferdinand on the banisters in passing. At the next corner we were attracted by an old stone stairway, and we climbed up, and I kept looking at the sharp angle of Nina's step as she ascended, raising her skirt, its narrowness requiring the same gesture as formerly length had done. She diffused a familiar warmth, and going up beside her, I recalled the last time we had come together. It had been in a Paris house with many people around, and my dear friend Jules Darbou, wishing to do me a refined aesthetic favour, had touched my sleeve and said, "I want you to meet," and led me to Nina, who sat in the corner of a couch, her body folded Z-wise, with an ashtray at her heel, and she took a long turquoise cigarette holder from her lips and joyfully, slowly exclaimed, "Well, of all people!" And then all evening my heart felt like breaking as I passed from group to group with a sticky glass in my fist, and now and then looking at her from a distance. She did not look. And listened to scraps of conversation, and overheard one man saying to another, "Funny how they all smell alike, burnt leaf through whatever perfume they use, those angular, dark-haired girls." And as it often happens, a trivial remark related to some unknown topic coiled and clung to one's own intimate recollection, a parasite of its sadness. My beautiful boy, little Kermy boy. Yes. At the top of the steps, we found ourselves on a rough kind of terrace. From here one could see the delicate outline of the dove-coloured Mount St. George, with a cluster of bone-white flecks, some hamlet, on one of its slopes. The smoke of an indiscernible train undulated along its rounded base and suddenly disappeared. Still lower, above the jumble of roofs, one could perceive a solitary cypress, resembling the moist twirled black tip of a watercolour brush. To the right, one caught a glimpse of the sea, which was grey and with silver wrinkles. At our feet lay a rusty old quay, and on the wall of the half-ruined house adjoining the terrace, the ends of some wire still remained hanging. I reflected that formerly there had been life here. A family had enjoyed the coolness at nightfall. Clumsy children had coloured pictures by the light of a lamp. We lingered there as if listening to something. Nina, who stood on higher ground, put a hand on my shoulder and smiled, and carefully, so as not to crumple her smile, kissed me. With an unbearable force, I relived, or so it now seems to me, all that had ever been between us, beginning with a similar kiss. And I said, substituting for our cheap formal vow, that strangely full and expressive you, to which the circumnavigator, enriched all around, returns. Look here, what if I love you? Nina glanced at me. I repeated those words. I wanted to add that something like a bat passed swiftly across her face, a quick, queer, almost ugly expression, and she, who would utter coarse words with perfect simplicity, became embarrassed. I also felt awkward. Never mind, I was only joking, I hastened to say, lightly encircling her waist. One should never joke or tease or abstain from true love, people of earth. Ask me how I know. Motherfuckers. Never mind. Mum is toothless and sexless and loveless. But the gods still ride shotgun with me every day in every way. Morning, noon and night, even with ants bothering me relentlessly. From somewhere a firm bouquet with small, dark, unselfishly smelling violets appeared in her hands, and before she returned to her husband and car, we stood for a little while longer by the stone parapet, and our romance was even more hopeless than it had ever been. But the stone was as warm as flesh, and suddenly I understood something I had been seeing without understanding. Why a piece of tinfoil had sparkled so on the pavement, why the gleam of a glass had trembled on a tablecloth, why the sea was a shimmer. Somehow, by imperceptible degrees, The white sky above Fialta had got saturated with sunshine, and now it was sun-pervaded throughout, and this brimming white radiance grew broader and broader, all dissolved in it, all vanished, all passed. And I stood on the station platform of Melech with a freshly bought newspaper, which told me that the yellow car I had seen under the plane trees had suffered a crash beyond Fialta, having run at full speed into the truck of a travelling circus entering the town, a crash from which Ferdinand and his friend, those invulnerable rogues, those salamanders of fate, those basilisks of good fortune, had escaped with local and temporary injury to their scales, while Nina, in spite of her long-standing, faithful imitation of them, had turned out, after all, to be mortal. And thus concludes today's offering. At least Nina lived well and enjoyed many lovers and many romances, and died a respectable married woman, faithful to the end. The little twists of fate. Mortal after all. Right, my beloved ones, my beautiful ones, my soulful ones, my fellow travellers through this dimensionality, this dystopian nightmare that is currently planet Earth. Let there be life, let there be light, let there be genuine joy and delight, let there be healing, let there be triumph, let there be gleeful, carefree laughter. Love you all. Bye for now.